Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Zoe Liu, who is the Maurice Greenberg Fellow for China Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Also, Zoe, you are a noted author. I'm going to mention two of your books, Sovereign Funds, How the Communist Party of China Finances Its Global Ambitions, which is just out. And for this conversation, I think it's relevant, your book last year, How BRICS de-dollarize the global financial system, which I think we should talk about in the context of BRICS. Welcome. And can we start by just defining BRICS? Because I always thought of it as an investment conceit. It's much more.
Yes, thank you so much, Diane, for having me. It's such a privilege to actually have the opportunity to not just watching your program, but also actually have an opportunity to talk to you. So now, in the context, you're absolutely right. BRICS indeed was originally a Goldman Sachs investment thesis. The idea was when developed economies such as the United States and rich countries in Europe were not growing as fast, but instead countries like China, like India, were the growth engine of the world. So from that perspective, how investors can capture higher return on investment, not just by sticking with safe low-risk investment opportunities in developed economies, but rather really expanding or diversifying their portfolio.
Let's unpack first, for anybody who doesn't know, what the acronym stands for. So BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, correct?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's correct.
And when did it become something more than an investment, thesis?
The global financial crisis, I would argue, actually would be, in retrospect, is the watershed moment when BRICS, instead of only being a concept investment thesis, only on the paper perhaps, but became a loose but important partnership. It's not the same as NATO. It's not the same as Quad in many ways. The idea is this is a group of non-Western, high-growing, high-population country that are going to redraw or redefine not just international economy, but also global governance. So there is the economic and financial aspect of it, and there is also the kind of the subtle, or sometimes not so subtle, discontent about how they think the international system should be governed.
Well, and it's interesting, even between Russia and China, when you started to see some of these, yuan-denominated or renminbi-denominated bonds and such, this idea of de-dollarizing is fascinating. We've had this recent expansion of this loose organization. What's the significance of that and the countries that were admitted?
I would argue that actually is quite significant for perhaps both economic reasons and geopolitical reasons. Economic-wide, with the expansion, so BRICS would add new members such as Saudi Arabia, Egypt, UAE, Iran, and Ethiopia, as well as Argentina. So with this expansion, that basically means the share of this expanded BRICS in terms of global GDP would be about 29% of the world. And in terms of export, that basically means BRICS group is going to be a quarter of the global export good market. And more important than that, in terms of oil production, in terms of population, it's even more significant. So, for example, just on top of my mind, the expanded BRICS would at the aggregate would have about 46% of global population, and in terms of oil production, with Saudi Arabia and Iran and UAE as well as Russia altogether, they would produce about 43% of global oil. So economically, they are very important.
Let me ask, is the genesis for pushing this and pushing for an expansion how important is China? Because we've seen China really exerting its influence as a regional power, and we've certainly seen it becoming a much more influential force, not just in the Middle East, but Africa and other parts of the world. So is this really, is China driving this expansion first, and to what end?
I think, Diane, that's fair to say. I would agree that China is a very important driver for BRICS expansion, but perhaps Russia as well, because right now Russia indeed, since Russia's war against Ukraine, on the one hand, there has been the concern about, well, this is going to be the moment that BRICS became no longer relevant, because how are you going to have one country being sanctioned by the West and having this loose alliance staying together, right? Mm-hmm. But in fact, it turned out that BRICS has been quite robust and expanded. And part of that was because Russia's economically and politically relatively resilient and trying to break away or bypass Western sanctions by pushing forward an alternative system. And although in this context, China is not yet in the same geopolitical difficulty as Russia, still President Xi Jinping, since he came to power, China's relationship with the United States and with the West, broadly speaking, has deteriorated. And in this context, China has incentive to further its vision for the global system and global order. Now, there are two ways for China to do that. One way is to trying to reform from within the existing global system, push changes through World Bank, IMF, and all that. But then the other approach to do that is to start your own system. And China has done that in terms of AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or in the BRICS context, it's the New Development Bank. And now with the expansion of BRICS, it is an alternative version or alternatives. Let me frame that again. It is an alternative system in terms of not driven by the United States or the West. And it definitely is a different version. It represents a different vision for global governance.
I'm interested in the financial implications, which is why I mentioned your book, your previous book about de-dollarizing. Let's remind people, first of all, the dollarizing part, which is the U.S. dollar as sort of the default, reserve currency for a lot of the countries we're talking about, and why they would want to move away from it.
Diane, you're right. The U.S. dollar is the default currency in international financial transactions, in international as a reserve currency, and it's also dominating in international trade and commodities pricing. It's very important for Russia, for Saudi Arabia. So from that perspective, there is both economic reasons and geopolitical reasons for countries that on the one hand, they don't necessarily print dollar themselves. And on the other hand, they might be subjected to US sanctions in terms of geopolitical turmoil. Now, the economic side of it, every time, for example, China, every time China wanted to do an international transaction, the largest trading economy in the world, and yet in terms of import and export, a lot of the transactions are settled and priced in US dollar. That for business, it means transaction cost as well as currency risk. So there are legitimate economic reasons to use local currencies in international trade. And that is very important for BRICS members. They have been pushing for the use of local currencies in both within BRICS trade as well as through the BRICS Plus mechanism, trying to reduce their economic vulnerabilities to the dollar dominance. And geopolitical reason becomes even more important since Russia's war against Putin's war against Ukraine and the West sanction against Russia. The whole idea of reserves parked abroad could potentially be seized.
So one thing, I know we're going to be watching this, but as this develops now with this expanded BRICS, what would be on your radar that you will be watching in terms of both the potency of this group and the impact it could have on Europe and the U.S.?
I would watch two things. The first one is the use of local currency in energy pricing, both oil and natural gas, as well as critical minerals. And then the second would be the development of or the expansion of alternative financial infrastructure. Now, right now, obviously global economy is powered by energy, and right now we are very much dependent on hydrocarbon. As I just mentioned, with the expanded version of BRICS is going to be the leading, or you might as well just call it the new OPEC, the idea that you basically have the most powerful OPEC members in the BRICS, right? Mm-hmm. And related to that, BRICS also have, through the BRICS Plus mechanism, have a connection with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a very important natural gas producing conglomerate. Yes, Shanghai Cooperation Organization was a security bloc in its very beginning, but the group of countries have Central Asian economies, have Iran, and Saudi Arabia is also very much interested in joining. And obviously you also have Russia. So through these two blocks, you have not just oil and gas, you not just have oil, but also natural gas as a transition fuel. That basically means if BRICS members could potentially advance, say, the use of renminbi in the pricing of oil or natural gas, that is not only going to significantly weakening the dollar's role in international commodity pricing, but actually provide an alternative vehicle, an alternative marketplace for countries like Russia or Iran or China.
A profound power shift, potentially. So thank you very much, Zoe Liu, Senior Fellow, Council on Foreign Relations. I very much look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Diane.